Hello and welcome to this FA webinar on receiving skills. Joining myself, Matt Portas, today is Paul Holder, Paul McGuinness, Justin Cochrane and Gemma Grainger. Within this session, we have three main aims. We want to start by talking about why are we focusing in and talking about receiving skills in this session and what the issue is within the modern game. We're also going to spend a majority of the time within the session talking about the essential individual skills for receiving, but also the individual tactics. And we'll break this aim down into part A and B and look at skills and tactics separately. And ultimately, we'll try and pull this together by talking about what are we going to do about it and giving some hints and straightforward tips about how we might coach receiving skills. Welcome, everybody.
Hi, Matt.
Paul,
Morning.
Paul, I'm just going to hand over to you to start with. And do you just want to give us a little bit of an introduction about why we're talking about receiving skills today?
Well, it is the moment you start introducing more than one player into practices and games, then you have to deal with receiving skills because they're sharing the ball, and so it's an integral skill. And I think the problem is basically we've done a lot of work on the ball when the players have got the ball, but receiving skills is a whole thing about communication and interactions and connections. And there's a before you get the ball, there's when you've got it at your feet, and what you do afterwards. So if you divide that into three, I wonder how much emphasis as coaches and as teachers of the game that we put on the middle bit, which is when you've got the ball at your feet, and what we do before and what we do after. I think there's certainly a lot more work being done on before you receive the ball, and probably, but not enough. And there's certainly not enough done on after. So that's why I think it's really important that we look at it today. And there is not one position on the pitch that if you don't have red hot receiving skills, that you can in the end be effective. So from the goalkeeper all the way through to the number 11. So I think as a base skill is probably one of the key skills that you have to be practicing all the way through your career.
Yeah, Justin, I'm going to bring you in because as Paul said there, it's a fundamental skill in the game, right?
Yeah, I think that regardless of the position that you play in, regardless of your age, regardless of the numbers you play in, whether it's 5v5, 7v7 or 11v11 or anything in between, if you want to move the ball between the thirds, and with it being an invasion game, you need to have good receiving skills. And hopefully by the end of this session, we'll be able to break down some of our thoughts and discuss it in a little bit more detail. But ultimately in an invasion game where you're trying to get as close to the opposition's goal as possible to score, it's important that all players involved can receive the ball and move the ball or dribble the ball or pass the ball or shoot very well. And it doesn't start with, but a big portion of that is how well they can receive the ball.
Great. And Paul McGuinness, Justin mentioned there about detail and enough, I guess the other question towards you is there enough focus towards this in your opinion at the moment?
Well, I think what happens is you sort of take some things for granted. You get playing, it becomes automatic. You pass, you play and move, and you just take it for granted. We're receiving, we're playing, and now we'll look at some higher order things. We'll look at some of the tactics, and we'll look at those. But if you don't put these skills right under the microscope and go in detail, then you might not be doing them as efficiently as you could. And in that sense, I think, hopefully this will be a good session at saying, what do we do? What do you need to do? What do the top players do in preparation to receive the ball, in actually receiving, before they receive, after they receive? What do they do? What are the main skills? So that in a sense, it's an individual tactic. How do I beat my opponent when I'm tightly marked? How do I receive it and escape them and keep the flow of the game going? So the best people at receiving, it's like a flow. The speed of the flow from the passer to the receiver to the next player, is a really smooth flow. So we need to look in more detail, I think, exactly how that happens and how the top players do it.
And finally, Gemma, what are you hoping to get into a deeper discussion about today in relation to this topic?
I think for me, just supporting what's already been said in terms of really paying attention to the detail of receiving. So, what does that look like for us as coaches if we're planning sessions? How do we plan the before, the during, the after? But really drilling down, into that detail. So, scanning is a key part of receiving. But how do you even then look at scanning and break that down and that detail in terms of what are you actually looking for? So when we're asking players to scan, what are they looking for? Finding out that information and just really how we use that as a coach in terms of our process. So really drilling down into that detail and then just building onto the position specific elements of receiving as well. So is it always the 360 receiving of a centre midfielder or, the difference between different positions, whether, you're always opening it one way or another. So yeah, for me, just really drilling down into that detail and then how we can work with our players, to accelerate their learning.
Brilliant. So, Paul Holder, you talked about kind of before, during, and after around receiving. Do you want to give us a little bit more insight into that at this point? A little bit more to discuss?
Yeah, the point is when does the receiving process start? When do you start thinking about receiving? And so, well before you've got the ball, and Paul and Justin and Emma will go into the detail, but well before you actually get the ball at your feet, there's things going on. There's a lot of planning, there's a lot of scanning, and some of the top players are thinking in the future. And we've got to help players to start thinking in the future. So, and I'm sure we'll see Michael Carrick in a minute. And you look at the before, he says, where do I want the pass to go? Now he thinks about that as the ball's on its move, as it's on its way, or even before that. And then he prepares, and then that process becomes instinctive over time. But the thing is, it only becomes instinctive if he practices it a lot and is reminded of when it doesn't go well. So, and that's coaching, or when it does go well. So the before for me is very important, but equally, and I'm not sure whether it comes out in this clip, but it's what happens afterwards, because that process is ongoing. You stay in the game. Once you've received and passed or shot or whatever, you're back in the game. Sometimes players drop out of the game once they've done something, as if someone else is going to take over. So I think the two elements, the before and the after, are absolutely critical. The middle bit is about technique, what you do, and that's tactical as well, and we'll go into that. But I think you'll see in this clip with Michael Carrick, he talks about the before, and it's interesting, and listen carefully about what he says about his touch, because it's all specific to him as an individual, and that's important. His receiving skills, his practice for him, and they differ according to Raheem Sterling. Will have a different take on it because he's a wide player, but essentially the generic skills are the same.
What are you thinking around similar really the receiving?
Get my body in a position to go forward as quickly as possible. That's always, it was my first thought. It wasn't so much put my body in position, it was where do I want my pass to go, and then kind of that would shape. Rather than thinking I'll get the ball, then where do I want to pass it, your body could be in all sorts of positions where that pass forward, that's the best pass, is not possible anymore because you're facing the wrong way. So you try and think about the pass and then prepare your body position or your angle because of the space to give yourself the best chance. And that kind of almost, well, it happens instinctively after as you go on and progress, but it's definitely the thought of, again, where's the most effective pass, and let me make the picture, because at this moment in time I can't make that pass, so I need to prepare my body in an angle and a position to be able to make that pass.
What's the difference between when you're marked and when you're not marked?
sometimes there's no difference. Sometimes you use the actual your marker as a guide as well, so as a reference point. Sometimes if you marked, in some ways I found it better because it would force you into getting in a good position to play the next pass. Sometimes you can get late if you're not marked. All of a sudden you sometimes do something a little bit slower or a little bit sloppy with it because you think I've got loads of time. Whereas if you're marked and you're pulling off that angle instantly in your body position and one touch, because you have to do it one touch. Sometimes you got time, you might take two. So
The actual first touch, but really, what are you thinking on that?
I always like my first touch to be close to us. I know people say get it out your feet, but I always like my first touch for me to be able to play it with my next without taking another stride. I didn't like getting it out your feet and having to take a stride because then that prepares everybody for the balls then passing. I think if I can take a touch and it's kind of, there's that little sweet spot just in your feet where you can then punch a pass quickly, touch pass, without having to touch, get out your feet, look up, take even that one step, then prepares the defenders and they can all of a sudden get set.
We're just going to come to Paul McGuinness first. Just some thoughts on what Michael was saying there, and perhaps first of all how that might link to some of the essential skills of receiving.
Yeah, well, I think straight away I know from talks with him and talking to Tony Carr at West Ham, who was his youth coach. He had the simple message to look forward, play forward all the time. Now that simple sort of thing in the back of his mind, always from his coach, meant that whatever happened, he was looking forward for the pass before it came. That then meant he would prepare his space to receive it, and it meant he would rearrange his body however the ball came to enable him to play forward. So just that simple message, as simple as that, even with grassroots kids, can we play forward, means that they're already looking. They've got to look forward before the ball comes. So then he'd prepare the space, he'd prepare his body, but also he's probably preparing a picture for the passer who's giving the ball to him to receive to. So they'd be all parts of the preparation, but it's all based around that one simple message from Tony Carr in the back of his head, drilled in, look forward, play forward, run forward. And that's there. And that meant he prepared the space. He's already had a look for the man. So he's got a picture ahead, like Paul was saying, thinking ahead. Then he's preparing the space where he might receive it. He's preparing a picture for the passer who's giving it to him. And he's preparing his body to get in a forward position in which to play the ball. And then when you talk about the skills, because he's tightly marked often in midfield, often over the years we've said, get the ball out of your feet. But he's saying, no, I like to keep it close because that pass could go quickly. If he got it out of his feet, and I've heard him before say it, if he gets it out of his feet and he has to take another stride, that would alert all the other defenders. So there's a whole load of skills and concepts all going into one there, and they're all interdependent on having the first thought, look forward, play forward. If you don't look forward, you don't see that forward picture, the furthest, most hurtful pass, none of the other stuff can happen.
And you kind of alluded to it there. There was skills that underpin it, but then you also touched on, and we'll come to it shortly, but just to get a clarification on the difference between the skills and the tactics, I guess. Like the tactics is when we're thinking about our own teammates or our opponents. Is that right?
Well, I think, like I say, they're all interdependent. So the skill would be that if you get a smooth pass into you that's playable, that allows you to not only look before the ball comes, but to look as it's on its way. So in itself, the positional play to create the space is one thing. The movement skills are another. Then you've got the scanning skills. And then you've got the tactics. Once you see where the defender's coming, if he's coming from your left-hand side, well, I'm going to look as though I'm going to go to that side and then turn away. So there's disguise in there. And it might be a change of pace. So I think the tactics in that situation are, you've already scanned, that's your reconnaissance. And then the tactics might be disguised to look like you're going one way, to change direction and to change speed would be another tactic. And of course, the timing of it, to bring the guy close, to entice him close to you. You saw a few of those clips. You waited that second. My old mentor at Man United, Jim Ryan, used to call it the arrogance of timing. Well, to sock them in and entice them close, so they're still moving, and then you pass and run against the flow of their movement, I think is another sort of individual tactic that you would use. Yeah.
Great. Noddy, would you like to come in with some observations there?
No, I think that's I think that is absolutely critical, that coaches can identify those skills, and the skill, and I think that's the thing that coaches can work hard on is their observation skills of what is actually happening, and that starts with looking at the best players, and then cascading it down. What would that look like as a start point for the youngest players? But it's really important that if you want these skills and you want to be masters of these skills, that you've got to practice them perfectly. Your body will remember whatever you practice. And they say practice makes perfect. No, practice makes permanent. So if you are, what you need to do as a coach is, if you can identify these skills, you can help players practice receiving skills as close to perfect as they can. And I know that kids won't get it right. I understand that. But it's really key that we keep repeating the same things, and then your body remembers it, and that's how you get mastery of it. It doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen just by fluke. You have to practice it. And I think it's really important that coaches start to think about the quality of the practice they do, and the demands that they put on players, and the repetition of that. And in the end, perfect practice will end up equal mastery.
And Justin, I'm going to come to you, because from what resonated with me listening to Michael there was talking about finding the space and getting his body in the right place in the space. And you talked before about awareness giving peace. Do you want to expand upon that a little bit at this point?
Yeah, I just feel that I played in midfield in the lower leagues and in non-league as well. And I looked at quite a lot of my favourite players over the years, talking about Valderrama, Pirlo, Busquets, De La Peña, Iniesta. When I looked at these players quite closely, their awareness, their perception, their excellent awareness gave them peace on the ball. So when the ball was on its way to them, because they knew exactly what was around them, how many people, what type of pressure, how the ball was coming into them, where they were on the pitch, they were so aware of what was around them. They were peaceful when they received the ball. They didn't ever look flustered. They never was under pressure. The heart rate never went up. And I just feel that the receiving skills, the key part of the receiving skills for me, and I might be wrong, but this is what I think, is the pre-receiving. So what happens before the ball comes to you.
Brilliant.
So recognizing where the space is.
Yeah, perfect. And Gemma, we've mentioned it.
Moving into that space on time, getting your body.
We're just losing Justin a little bit there. We're cutting out. I'll come to you, Gemma, about the point around scanning, because you mentioned that in your introduction, and how would you link that into the kind of skill element of this? And then I'll come to Paul McGuinness after that.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to build on what Justin was saying there, for me, the before phase, and really focusing on, what are the brilliant basics, if you like, in the before phase. So if us as coaches are working with players, that scanning phase, can players recognize the space? Can they recognize the space, take in the picture, arrive into the space at the right time? So even just the complexity of that. And then just listening to Michael, and he talked about his body shape. So a key factor in receiving is your body shape. So in that before phase, we know that if you get that right, and how we set challenges for our players within that. So within the constraints practices we do, one of the challenges that I use with some of the younger players is, can you get yourself in a position where you can see the ball and the goal? So it naturally opens up your body to be able to see the pitch. So just different ways that we can really drill into those, those simple principles. And then another one listening to Michael was around, the speed at which he created angles for himself, to prepare himself to play that, that look forward, play forward mentality.
Yeah, Paul, I think this one was yours. Would you cross the road without taking a look what's coming first? Do you want to?
Yeah, I often say that, what do parents do? People say, when should we be introducing this to kids playing football? Well, the fact is, when you have your own kids, you bring them up and you make them realize that the road is a very dangerous place to be, and to cross the road is really, is dangerous, and they need to look both ways. So you'll hold them by the hand from a young age, grab them, you'll talk sternly to them how dangerous it is, and you'll look and you'll check and you look right and look left and look right and look left, and you'll go across a really quiet road first so they get used to it, and slowly as they get older you'll get a little bit busier road so they can judge the distances, but you'll be holding their hand with them. And then later on you'll do that, and you'll let them go free, at least on a quiet road, and then eventually you'll think, well, they can judge the time and space, and they've got it rammed into them now. It's automatic to look left and right and left and right. Well, at Manchester United for years, where I was both a player, I had this as a player with Eric Harrison as the coach, and he was also the coach for the class of '92 with Beckham, Scholes, Giggs, and a whole host, generation 15, 20 years worth of players. And I would do the same with the players I had there. And it was Eric Harrison, and it was a 20-minute sort of every day he did it. Some ways he bored the players with it. In a sense, they did it every day, but it was so essential. It was an exercise, say, in half a pitch, 16 players, 4 balls, and it was a receiving exercise where there'd be 4 balls played about. But before you received it, you looked over your shoulder. Then you got eye contact with the passer. You made a sharp run, maybe on an angle, but you made it clear from the eye contact, the speed of the run, and maybe a little shout that you wanted to pass. The pass had to be played playable, and then you would come off. But as you were coming off, because the pass was smooth and playable, you would have another look. So you'd have looks around you, either side. You'd check around you to see where everything was, and then you'd receive inside and outside the foot. Let the ball run across your body, take it late, take it early, take it with the outside, the inside. But each time you had to look behind you before you went and as you came off. And you came off. Now, I've heard some people say, oh, yeah, but there's no opposition. But this was, like Gemma said, you're making it automatic first. Then you'd slowly introduce, it'd be whenever you had played a game, then these things would be happening, but there would be opposition. So now you'd have already got in this routine, but you look over your shoulder. Sometimes he would play silent football, so you couldn't be told man on or anything. You really had to look, and he made it very clear to you. If you got caught in possession, you hadn't had a look. He would remind you in the strongest terms, just like your parents would do if you were crossing the road without looking. Because in essence, like Justin says, if you can do that, you can be at peace. You know what's going. You're 3 steps ahead. You can disguise and do all sorts of things. If you don't, you can't get a flow away. You have to stop, then look, then pass, and that slows everything down. Or you might stop and get caught on the ball. And just going back to that, in my time at Man United, playing, I was a young reserve player playing against the first team. Norman Whiteside, who the older members will remember, was a terrific player, was the youngest player to ever play in the World Cup. So age about 18, a ball went up in this practice match on the edge of the box. It's going to go land about 20 foot high. It's going to land right on top of Norman. And I'm thinking, this is my chance to win, because when he takes his touch, I'm going to come in and smash him. Doesn't care if he's in the first team. I'm going to take this ball off him and shoot. But as I got there steaming in, I didn't see he'd had a glance, but he must have done. He already knew a quarter turn. And what he did was he as I'm coming in and he's got his back to me on the edge of their box, he half volley controlled it with the outside of his left foot round one side, spun and went round the other side and was running down the pitch as I was still running the other way. So it really makes you realise the very top players. And I asked him about it years later, and he said, well, it's just a quarter turn. It's just a little glance there, and and you don't let them know that you've seen them, and then off you go. So that's the importance of it, the real top players, yeah.
Great player. First FA Cup goal, I really remember watching that, Norman Whiteside against Everton.
Yeah.
Right.
Matt, can I just pick up on the analogy of crossing the road? Because I think that's quite important, because back in the day, they used to call that the Green Cross Code, and it was put in all primary schools and everything. You look left, you look right, or you look right and left. I don't know which way. Well, perhaps I should get that right? I think you look right, left, and then right again. Yeah. And then you walk across the roads. Now, that was put up in every primary. It was a message that you kept repeating over and over again, and it was non-negotiable. And I wonder, you know, it's the same with the receiving things. We've got to make things non-negotiable. You know, you look and you look and you look again. It's not something that's optional. It's not negotiable. And then kids will think, oh, that's important, if the coaches thinks it's important. And that was the key about the green cross code across the road, because it's a decent analogy. Yeah. You know, so
absolutely. Justin, have we got Justin back?
I know he's crossing the road.
I hope so. Apologies with this, my connection.
No, it's okay.
Can you hear me?
Do you want to come in? Yeah, I can hear you. Do you want to come in with another point around like the external impact of execution on skills rather than technical deficiency?
I think a lot of the time we think it's a technical issue why kids don't receive well during games, but a lot of the time it could be external. It could be they're worried about losing the ball. They're worried about giving it away. They think they might lose the game or concede a goal. The parents might be getting onto them. Their peers might be getting onto them. It might be the coaches. So I think it's important we create that right environment so they don't play football fearfully. I played district football. Paul Holder was my coach.
Yes.
Who's on this call, funny enough.
Yeah, we won every game. Without him, by the way. We had to play 2 players in a free role, and we were free to experiment, free to roam, free to play, and it enabled us to just play free and not play fearfully. And I worry that without knowing the broader perspective, that are we being a little bit too prescriptive and a little bit too serious with players? And with all that we're saying so far, it's important that what level you're coaching at, you relate it and you chunk it down for your context. But I think them external things that affect players, you know, we need to be aware of them.
Paul Holder, just bring you back in now that you've had some glowing tributes there.
Oh no, I paid a lot of money for them.
Do you want to talk us through this next bit about the top-down skills?
Yeah, top-down skills is not a term. It's just something that I've put down, and I think what we're talking about when we're coaching now is think of that what's going on in the head and work down to the feet, because the head, we know that if you haven't got spatial awareness and all those things on the right-hand side, then your feet and your movement isn't going to be in the right place at the right time. So it's really important to get the top bit right. And that lends itself to feel and sense. And Justin was saying the other day when we were talking to him, when he played, he could sense and feel pressure. He can sense and feel. Norman Whiteside, he glanced at Paul. He glanced at Paul, but he probably felt and sensed the speed that he was coming at, and that comes from practicing it. And then you get timing. You know, when you have your touch, when you're going to move, when you do this, when you do that. And those feel, sense and timing, I think, are critical, but only comes from work about awareness and perception and anticipation. So you've got to start thinking head down. And then that lends itself to adaptability. And I think Gemma's got a really great point about adaptability, because that is a big word that we need to investigate. You know, our players can be adaptable. In other words, whoever you're playing against and whatever situation. So that is, I think, a thing for coaches to hang on to is, are you thinking head down or are you thinking feet up?
Gemma, do you want to go into that point around adaptability, please?
Yeah, definitely. So a link to the adaptability, 2 things really. So the opposition, but also as well the players that you're playing with. So that recognition to what are the players' strengths and preferences of the players. So for example, you know, if you're playing in our England team in the Lionesses and you're playing with Ellen White, you know that one of Ellen White's strengths is coming towards the ball. You know, she uses her body as a barrier. She's brilliant at bringing people into play. And then the opposite to that will be thinking about playing, you know, with Jodie Taylor. And we know one of Jodie's strengths is really, you know, hurting teams by utilising that space in behind. So she's brilliant at receiving the ball as it's played in space on the move. So just recognising really that how important the players that you play with and whatever their strengths are and preferences you know, and utilizing that. So that adaptability, not only to recognize the opposition, but actually your team as well, your teammates.
Right. And we're just going to hear a little clip now from Marcus Rashford talking and expanding on those points, Gemma.
So the forward position requires a lot of discipline in your movement, but you can't stop. You have to be relentless with it. Just simple things like preparing your space before you make the movement. So maybe taking the defender away, even though you know you're going to go into that channel. But it's all based off connections with the players. So, say for example, Juan, when Juan's on the ball, I never go too close to him. I prefer to pull away, let him have his space, and then I can make my movements into his space. Where someone like Jesse, if he's got the ball, you go close, and then you can link and change positions at the same time. So, you know, it's just what you see in the time. And then I just say always prepare your space before you move. If you just move, then it's pointless.
So it's probably a good time to come to you again, Paul McGuinness, and just I guess get some initial reflections off Gemma's points and what Marcus was saying there, and then maybe give us a little bit more insight as to how we might start to observe these individual tactics in more detail.
Yeah, before we get on to the diagram here, to definitely go off what both Justin has said and Gemma. You know, Justin's very much saying, you know, we can't play with fear. They have to be free and able to experiment and to feel free. And very much so. If you're forever get it, give it, tempo high, move it on again, well, you're directing the player all the time, and you might be, don't lose it there. Then they're playing under a fear or a certain focus to move the ball quickly all the time, which might not always be the right thing to do. It might be to hold the ball until the right moment to play it. It might be first time, but it might be to hold it until the right space comes about. So if the coaches and the environment, the people on the side, the whole environment creates a fear factor, then the players aren't able to have the awareness and the freedom that they can't be absorbed in just looking at the cues of the game and reading the cues. So that then helps them to develop, can I get that smooth pass? Can I look around me? Can I develop these skills? Because I'm not under so much pressure. I can actually freely sort of play the game and observe what's going on and make that automatic. Once you've got those fundamental things like smoothing the pass out, getting the receiving right, having a look over my shoulder, well, that then allows you more thinking time to do what Gemma was talking about. Well, who am I playing with? What's their strengths and weaknesses? You know, if you've got to think about, can I control the ball because it's bouncing, and I've got to shift it quick because the coach says so. Well, you're never going to get to that stage of what sort of opponent am I playing against, and what's the centre forward? Does she like it to feet, or does she like it behind, or does he like it? You know, does he like it fast into him, or so on? So I think, you know, that's important. Those points to make right at the start. And in that sense, when again to point about my experience at Man United, Sir Alex would always say, make sure the players have no fear going on the pitch. Make sure they've got no fear of getting the ball anywhere. So in that sense, you have to give them the tools, you know, to have a look over the shoulder, to do all the things that Eric did. But certainly the no fear part and not putting too much pressure on them and telling them what to do all the time, you have to leave them free to play the game, will lead to then the stuff that Gemma was talking about now, picking out relationships with certain players, definitely.
Yeah. Get into detail a bit more, Paul. Gemma, come back to you. Yeah. Anything else to add around the points that Paul's made, or on the back of the Marcus Rashford clip?
No, I just think it highlights again that you know, that different thinking, that higher level thinking. You know, if we can get to a stage where we are thinking about what the strengths of the team are, then that's only going to be a good thing. But you know, not underestimating the basics that need to be in place, you know, for that to take place, and the environment being a key one. So that key message around, you know, the no fear, or the free to express yourself. Never underestimating how important, you know, those messages are, and the impact that will have on the way that, you know, the team play.
So Paul McGuinness, how might we start to observe?
Yeah, this is just something that we started to use on some of the courses, in a sense, saying, can we put it under the microscope, this duel of, and looking at receiving, the passer, the receiver, and the defender, and how can we really focus on it? So the quadrants are an idea to say, well, how would you receive it, depending on where you were in the circle and where the defender is. So here you might be able to get it to feet. If you were up on the top right hand one, then you might be able to get a through ball. Or if you enticed the defender into the center circle area really close, there would be space for a run behind. So it helps you to see and really get a clear picture of where how you can prepare the space to receive the ball. So that's the idea behind that, and how you would get it. And then you would start to look probably from the head downwards. You'd look at the head. Where are they scanning? Shoulders, arms, legs, and so on, and the footwork. So you would have a look at all the key factors. And then in terms of looking at it before, during, and after. So in this case, you see that Raheem Sterling, it's a nice analogy that Pete Sturgis uses in the foundation phase. He's saying, well, it's like a revolving door. You've enticed the defender in close to you. He's come into this part of the revolving door, and you're going to spin out quickly out the other side with a change of direction, a change of speed, and probably disguise, and maybe using your body as a barrier in that way to spin off out of it. And if you look at the top right-hand corner, you can use this also, that the centre forward there, I think it's Jesus, is also, if you put a quadrant around him, he's blind side and in the top quadrant, ready to prepare to receive a cross that might come into the middle, so that the defender can't see him at the moment, and he might be able to escape by going to the near post, or in fact going to the near post and then pulling back. So that's how we'd use that under the microscope and the quadrants to zoom in and look at the detail. Yeah. Great.
And I guess that also gives you an opportunity to look at the detail that you were talking about as well, Paul Holder, around the head, heart, feet analogy that you made a couple of slides ago. You can really see how you can use this to help get the detail about what you're observing with your players.
I think coaches can help themselves by really. You can do practices in small-sided stuff, and what Paul's saying is there's not a lot of complexity about the practice, so that frees you up and relaxes you about what you can see. The trouble is when you do 8v8s, 9v9s, and 11v11s and stuff, is you get lost in that. It's a busyness about it that sometimes it gets a bit crowded. So that's why, like if you want to do receiving skills and really do them well, you have to have really keen observation skills. And sometimes that might mean, like practicing in smaller areas, and lesser numbers rather than in big numbers. The other thing is I think that with receiving skills and you're doing the scanning and planning, it lends itself to directional practices as often as possible, because you need to know what's forward. If you're saying play forward, which way's forward? If you're in a circle, forward is only the way you're facing. So it lends itself to directional practices as well. And people get used to looking left, right, backwards and forwards. There's a bit of a what I call a football compass about that you learn unconsciously. So it's really important that if you're doing receiving, if you want to help receiving skills, then make it as directional as you can. And even though the quadrant is a circle, it is directional, if you see what I mean. The ball goes to somewhere and it's heading somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's important.
Okay, so we've discussed some of the issues, and we've started to talk about the detail of that. I guess what's really important now is to get into a bit more nitty-gritty about what we're going to do about it and how we might help players to improve and develop their receiving skills. Justin, I'm going to come to you first. Can you hear us okay?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, no, it's fascinating listening and learning all the time. Just back to the Michael Carrick one and linking to that about him having the ball quite close. When we played against Mexico this season, they were very similar. Their first touch in 1v1 duels was always dead, and then they decided whether to bob or weave or move the ball quickly off the front foot, off the inside of the foot, the outside of the foot. They're very good at it. 2 days later, we played Spain, They were totally different. A lot of their receiving skills was off the line. So the ball comes into them from one angle, off the line at a different angle. All their players were outstanding at it. And I think Paul must have mentioned earlier that it's down to the individual to create their own skill set. But what we can help players with, I think, is there's lots of things we can in terms of the pre-receiving that we've discussed, but turning both ways is really important. Being able to open out on your right foot and open out on your left foot, and not necessarily being two-footed, but being two-sided, so you can receive and open up on both sides. I think receiving on different surfaces is key. Receiving, can you take it on your chest? Can you take it on your thigh? Can you take it on your head? And if something just comes to mind also is like dealing with a bouncing ball. A lot of the time the ball doesn't come smooth, but sometimes it comes out of the air or it comes off a second ball. What we like with our receiving skills and recognition of space, and ultimately putting the ball where you want it to do your next action. And just to the people that are listening to this, it's really important that we've spoken a lot of high level stuff and some stuff that might be a bit tricky to do with younger players, but it's just about knowing your audience and knowing, just chunking it down for them and making it very simple and very clear, because almost the delivery is almost as important as the content. Okay, so I'll say it. So the delivery, how you deliver it, you got to make it in digestible format to whoever's in front of you. So that is something that I'd definitely like to say to the coaches here. It's important that even if you take one thing and deliver it to your group, then that's success. And as long as we keep doing the same things frequently, then we'll get progress later on down the line.
Yeah, I think you also had a point around where you receive on the field. Sometimes it's not. We often think about receiving from a forward pass, but it might be actually where your team is almost rotating or maintaining possession and playing backwards towards you. So I'm thinking perhaps like a holding midfielder, for example, receiving the ball. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I think it's a common perception that the player receives it from a defensive player, turns and then passes the ball forward. But a lot of the time, as a midfield player, the play might be in front of you. So it might be in front of you, it might be with your forwards or your wide player or your fullback who's ahead of you as a central midfield player, and he caps out and plays to you. And I think it's important there you recognise where the space is. It's the same principles. There's a clip of Michael Carrick, I think Yaya Toure was coming to him and he said he used the player as like a reference. So regardless of where you're on the pitch, it's about being totally aware of what's around you and then using your body maybe to hide the ball or to shield the ball or to protect the ball. So these are all things that as you practice more and as you play more game scenarios, I think it's important that your training session, a lot of the portion of the session should look like a game, that these kids they'll build up the memory of the movements and the memory, and they'll start to get a feel of the timing, like we mentioned on the slide previously.
Great. Paul Holder, I'm going to come.
But yeah, definitely all different, not just.
No, go on, Justin. Finish your point.
Sorry, go on.
Finish your point, mate.
No, it's not always just turning, receive, turn, play forward. Sometimes it's you're already facing the way you want to play and just being receptive and aware of what's around you, basically.
Great. So, Paul Holder, I'm going to come to you. Justin made a couple of points there about receiving in different ways, in different positions and different areas, also different games and surfaces to kind of maybe help develop some of those skills. Do you want to expand upon that?
No, I think everyone on this call will concur with that and say it's absolutely vital. And it's also in different spaces. Yeah. If you're a wide player, your movement to receive is going to be slightly different to if you're playing centre back. And that's why Justin mentioned about receiving the ball coming backwards. You have different, and if you have different sort of positional responsibilities as you get older. The key is, and what he said about the Spanish, which is interesting, is that they're two-sided, not necessarily two-footed. That might be a product of them playing small-sided court mentality games in primary schools and stuff like that, where position is not so relevant as positioning. And so therefore they occupy the court, or if it's futsal, basketball, handball, whatever, they go across the court. So they do they do learn to go two-sided. I wonder if we can if you're talking about receiving skills, I wonder if we lock kids into positions too early. Yeah, they don't get that experience. The other thing is receiving. How often do we practice throw-ins? You know, in a game, there might be 40, 50 throw-ins in a game. That's receiving. And Justin did an invoke about the balls coming out of the air. Absolutely, from throw-ins. You know, and so that how many times you see practices where they're kick-ins? And that might lend itself to another point about the spaces you play in. You know, for grassroots and for kids, if they want to really focus on their receiving, sometimes they need to play in bigger areas, and sometimes in small areas. And so it's that. And finally, for me, if you want the kids to think that receiving skills are important, then you must make it important and keep referring, this is important, and don't let them off the hook if they're not doing the basic things properly. Don't let, oh, unlucky. No, well, it probably isn't. It means we probably have to work harder at it and keep things simple.
Yeah.
That's what Justin and I concur with that. If you're working with kids, you know, you've got a syllabus that might be always be in a position to play forward. You could work on that all year.
Oh.
You know,
Yeah. Absolutely. Gemma, I'm going to come to you and go back to the scanning, because I think you've got an important point about not just looking, but working with players to help them understand what they're looking for.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, you sometimes I'm watching players and you see their head moving, you know, left, right consistently, you know, scanning, but actually just taking the time to, you know, to confirm, well, what are they looking for? Do they have a picture? Is that helping them? You know, are they trying to recognize the space, and really going back to that simplicity, that space will give them time. And if it's just that simple concept and them understanding that if they can recognize the space and that's going to give me more time, then that's just a fundamental part of any player, whether, you know, you're 6-year-old or whether you're a full international. So again, just really reinforcing you know, not just getting players in the habit of moving their head because they think that that's what the coach wants to see.
Great.
You know, and just like, spinning. So yeah, that would be my point around that.
Great. And Justin, it's important to understand the player that you're working with as well, in terms of being able to set what you're trying to do with them.
Yeah, for sure. But I just have to say what Gemma said there is that's the gold dust for me. Just like that, what are they seeing? It's very hard to measure, but once the kids get good at it, you notice that they're seeing things, because you notice in their actions, they know what's around them, whether it be a pass, whether it be a dribble, whether they'll let the ball run across their body. They'll start being more aware of it. And I think that's so important for us as coaches to notice what they're seeing. And maybe sometimes you stop the practice and say, what did you see there? What made you make that decision? And when they start to get that, and you notice it as a coach, and then they notice it, it makes the game become a lot easier to them. There's times when I played in the lower levels and I didn't know what was around me and I was panicked, you know, so I then give the ball away because I wasn't aware. My techniques might have been pretty good in terms of controlling and receiving, but because I wasn't aware of what was around me, because of what Gemma said, I didn't have a look, or I did have a look, I didn't take in that information. It becomes a fear of the unknown. You're not sure what's behind you or to the side of you, and you end up taking maybe the safe option. If we want players going forward in this country who are more deceptive.
Justin's just dropped out a minute there. I'm going to come to you now, Paul. And
10p in a metre.
Yeah, more charge. That's it. Paul McGuinness, you talked about previously, a few minutes ago, you talked about playing with no fear and setting up that atmosphere. Have you got any examples of how you might do that and how that might play out to help the players?
Yeah, I think that's what we're talking about here. Is in receiving is a lot of interdependent sort of skills. So you have to get the fundamentals right. If you don't get the right connection between the passer and the receiver, it's very difficult. The ball's bobbling, it's bouncing. So you have to get a smooth pass, but you also have to get a signal. This is the time I want it. It has to be clear. You know, I've created this bit of space by my position or by moving the defender away to come short or whatever it is. And now I'm going to show you with my body movement. I'm going to communicate that. Now, then when we get to it, the next fundamental is, can you actually control the ball and keep it? sometimes that's one thing that really stops people receiving. Sometimes they don't want to receive it because when they get it, they're not good enough at holding it, manipulating it, twisting, turning. So we have to get those skills right, staying on the ball for the right amount of time to shake the defender off and create the next pass. Now, when I hear sort of Gemma talking about, well, do they see the picture? Well, that's also dependent on us creating practices whereby the right picture will be happening a lot so that they're able to recognize it. So in order to get it's a three-person process. It's the passer to the receiver to the next receiver. That's the constant situation. So the picture is dependent on the other person getting in the right position to start with. So if they're in the right, if the ball comes across from the midfield over to the right midfield player, and now she's looking at the winger, say, well, if the winger's wide, that's given a position, an idea that, straight away, she's had a look beforehand, and over to the right-hand side, the winger may be in a position to drop off and get it, but also might be in a position to run behind. So depends on what the fullback does. So now that's the picture she sees, but the movement of the player will determine what happens next, and maybe the cleverness of the passer. So it might be the wide player runs high, the defender goes with them, and they check back and create a little bit of space. At that point, the right midfield player may lift their leg to play towards the winger, and the fullback reads it and comes rushing in. And at that point, the passer turns their foot at the last second and plays the ball inside the fullback for the winger to run onto. So these are all interdependent things, but we have to create the pictures both to receive the ball and ahead of the ball so that they can see it clearly and they get lots of repetition of that. Now, if you play in too crowded an area with too many players, they're never going to see that. So small-sided football can be good, but in this case, we're asking them to think and prepare. So they might need a bigger space, in which to do it at first. And then we can go through it and say, what picture did you see? What was the key factor that was missing there? And they might say, I wasn't on the half turn. I couldn't see the defender come in, or I wasn't moving the defender before they came. So you've got time and space. You make it clear. Now, in smaller numbered games, 5 or 6 aside, that makes clarity. So that they're not sort of lost, like Justin was saying. If we play an 11 aside too soon, they might not see the wood for the trees until they've got that concept. So that's a few ways in which you can help and make it clear. But none of these things will be clear unless you've got the fundamentals right, because the whole process is interdependent on these fundamentals working.
Yeah, and you might be able to do it in games as well, mightn't you? If you work with an opposition coach, for example, you might be able to set up scenarios that gives players more time and space and things like that to be able to improve.
Well, I've got 3 or 4 examples here that you're asking. Well, what sort of conditions could you do? So I've already spoken about Eric Harrison doing that practice regularly and then playing silent football, so that they have to look. The next example I've got is Tony Carr saying, play forward, pass forward, but also being very clear on keeping the ball playable. After that, I've got the example of Dario Gradi in training, sort of virtually not allowing tackles. He wanted interceptions, as Justin would know. He was one of his players, but by not allowing tackles straight away, he gives an opportunity for no fear of that and to go and get on the ball. And then the last example I've got is Jim Ryan and Paul Hart. When Jim was the reserve team coach at Man United and Paul Hart was at Leeds. So you've got 2 clubs who were big rivals, but they had a series of collaborative games with their reserve teams where they had special rules to allow more space for receiving to occur. So the players had to drop off towards the halfway line and couldn't press until the defender had his second touch. They also at times had a 35-yard line offside, so there was more space there. They also had very strict refereeing for it to happen, or they didn't allow the ball to be cleared out of play. They had to pass the way out to encourage passing. And what they found was that the ball was in play 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes without a stoppage, with loads and loads of repetition for these skills to occur.
Yeah, Matt, can I say that you can put practices down where you don't have to lay zones and cones everywhere. You can change the rules and regulations in the game and constraints to get exactly the same thing. I think we sometimes want to lay zones and things, and that doesn't help in understanding time and space necessarily. You know, we have to think about, those are great examples from Paul about how you don't change and put zones down, you just put conditions on the game.
Great stuff.
Yeah, and just a condition from the coach, just one
exactly.
from the coach. So I remember John Allpress, who you'll know well, John, who's works with Spurs now, works with the FA. Just a simple question to the players: how can you let the ball run across your body? Now, straight away, that gets them to think, oh, I've got to open up here, or I've got to get my body between me and the defender. So straight away, a simple question like that can lead them to the answers. And then it might be the next question, how can you help him as a passer to do this? Or what did you notice? What did you notice about why it went well or why it didn't? So they would be really good little coaching questions that would help it as well.
Brilliant. Guys, it's been a fascinating hour. Its time has flown by. I'm just going to come to each of you in turn just to get your one take-home message that you can maybe summarise in a short sentence or two. I'm going to start with Gemma, if you don't mind, please, Gemma.
Yeah, I guess the main message for me would be about creating those deliberate habits. So if you took one thing away to implement into your team, and it was for you to have lots of repetition in your practices about recognizing space, the impact that would have then on your receiving skills could be so much. So in terms of that simplicity, for me, would be within the players or the teams that you're working in, what habits can you start to really identify and then create lots of opportunities within your practices.
Thank you, Gemma. Justin? You there?
I think he's run off.
You still need that 50p in the meter. Let's try Paul McGuinness. What would your main take-home message be?
Well, I think the first thing is you have to really zoom in and focus on it. So, yeah, this is something that's really important. It's not just something matter of fact. So, you have to understand that. But then also the simple messages, keep it simple. And you must understand that they're interdependent. You've got to smooth the pass out, but you've got to have had a look before it comes. And, you are trying to go forward. I mean, it's hard to put it into one message, but to give them enough space and time to think about it, and also, let them experiment, let them try it out without putting them under too much pressure, or you've lost it there. No, they have to learn from that, but you have to guide them. Yeah.
Great. And Paul Holder, a message from you?
Yeah, I just think that if coaches can help players and help themselves to think in the before, during, and after about receiving in those three time frames, if you like, I think that would help, and also to help every player to think and play forward. Yes, what does that look like? So how do you create an environment and practices in which you can help players do that? Because that's the purpose of the game. Keep things simple.
Great stuff. Guys, that brings an end to this session. I hope you've enjoyed it. Sorry that we had a couple of technical issues with Justin, but I don't think that that removed the enjoyment and the information that was put across by the panel today. We hope to see you again on another FA webinar very soon.